Hades is the best game ever made. In this video, we'll discuss why Hades is actually the best game of all time and why you should play it based on our completely unbiased and objective opinion that I'm sure 100% of viewers will agree with and will generate commentary only telling us how correct we are. In this video, we'll go over how the game changed concepts midway, forced the studio to redevelop their engine, spent 2 years in early access, launched as an exclusive on the hated Epic Games Store, but still managed to win universal acclaim and even snag a Hugo Award, the only video game to have ever done so. This is the fourth in a series of videos exploring how many games have gotten impressively huge and committed fan bases, and what's great about each of them. If you haven't noticed it yet, the title is not a serious one. Hades was first announced during the Game Awards 2018 by an official trailer directing viewers to check out playhades.com and giving immediate early access to the Epic Games Store. What you may not know is that the developer realized mere minutes before the trailer was shown that the main URL was a 404, page not found. The game's developer, Supergiant Games, is a small independent studio active in California since 2009, who enjoyed some moderate fame from their 2011 title Bastion. The core team that developed Bastion came from EA after watching smaller developers successfully innovate with titles such as Plants vs. Zombies or Braid, and feeling that they could not really do that at a large profits-focused entity like EA. Working out of a rented house with just 7 people, they managed to pull off a successful game in just a couple of years. From here, the developers would go on to make Transistor and Pyre, which also received positive reviews and managed some decent sales in addition to a few minor Game Award wins. This enabled the studio some growth, but it still remained very small, keeping both art and music in-house. It is the small size of the studio and the multi-hatting of each developer that led to the confusion around the game's launch time, as everyone working on the game was also managing the website, trailers, promotion, the Epic Games Store integration, and even social media, all while the heads of the studio were attending the Game Awards in person. They claimed that the rest of the team in the studio managed to pull some magic, keeping the game from leaking, getting the main URL online, and magically nobody noticed that the title had announced about 20 minutes earlier on the Epic Games Store homepage. That immense streak of magic or luck would carry on throughout development, turning around impossible odds. Early access is a double-edged sword for a developer and publisher, and sometimes for players too. While early access can give dedicated fans the opportunity to give valuable feedback and improve titles they are excited for, the availability of a public alpha with lots of bugs and the obviousness of the game as an incomplete and imperfect product can severely hurt its appeal, turn off potential full-game buyers, and make the developer look bad. The Hades development team approached early access with a lot of enthusiasm, but they would soon discover that their really engaged fanbase had extremely high expectations for their product, and it put a huge amount of pressure on the team to live up to those standards. Amir Rao would say in 2019, "We have an active player community out there that we're keeping an eye on and interacting with on a daily basis, so that does change things. They have a lot of feedback. I think they have high expectations for us, so I think we do feel a certain amount of pressure to live up to and exceed their expectations, really." It was that commitment to exceed expectations that made the studio really engage with player feedback and do deep dives into the data, noticing that the playtime was extremely high and people were replaying the same sections long after it should have become dull or completed. These dives were incorporated into development roadmaps, and there was a constant feedback loop between players and developers that kept things moving well beyond its initial 1-year early access estimate. The feedback, though, would eventually become overwhelming, prompting the studio to amend its feedback intakes and become more selective about what to take on board. As most successful developers discover, sometimes the player base doesn't really have all the answers, and it's the studio's own creativity that should drive decisions forward. By December 2019, a year after the game had been announced and entered early access, the team had completed multiple large updates and taken an immense amount of feedback to the point Hades was the biggest game Supergiant has ever made. But by now, their exclusivity with Epic was done, so they had the opportunity to add the game to early access on Steam. This should have simply rolled replayability adjustments and inclusions, but it instead added the huge realization that the game needed multiple localizations, new payment processors, etc. to accommodate the more international Steam audience. They even bundled in Pyre with the early access to attract more users to try it out on Steam. The positive reviews quickly piled up, and everything looked rosy. But then, the pandemic happened. In early March 2020, their team set up for remote work from their homes using Zoom, as everyone else did during that time, and discovering just how much they actually needed the office. However, since the Supergiant Games team was a small studio and used to making do, the lockdowns didn't shut down development in the same way that many larger studios experienced, and the team had the added benefit of radically increasing its feedback pool. As the lockdowns extended into the year, more users were online and playing games thanks to working from home, and new feedback kept coming in. But this is where the development team realized that their previous engine working on C# from the XNA framework was not up to par for their performance goals. So they used the extra development time that was sort of handed to them by COVID and remade it to native C, which of course also allowed them to make the game multi-platform, announcing a Nintendo Switch version with even multi-platform progress. With this done and giving only 1 hour notice, the game officially launched in September of 2020 on 3 platforms, Steam, Epic, and Switch, after almost 2 years in early access and 3 years in development, and it would be an absolute smash hit. Now, understanding the lengthy development process and the challenges and lucky breaks the developers got is one thing, but there's a secret to all successful and memorable games. They all invariably create something rare. The uniqueness isn't always something completely new, it can be a masterful amalgamation of many concepts. In Hades' case, it was the absolutely astonishing feat of effectively reinventing roguelikes. Much like every game we've touched so far in this series, Hades' success is the result of the passion of its development team and their flawless execution of their vision that becomes enthralling to the player. From its phenomenal and compelling artwork made almost entirely by one in-house artist, to the binge-worthy music score dreamed up by no other than Zagreus' voice actor Darren Korb, Hades is demonstrably a work of love. That love and its effective redefinition of the genre begins with the story. The game's setting being ancient Greek myth comes from its creative director's personal interest in the subject and the way the stories of these gods have survived millennia. It actually originated as a different idea related to Minos and escaping the labyrinth. But as production got further into the game, the team's objectives to create branching narratives became too difficult, so the entire game setting was shifted to the family of the gods approach, forcing more work but ending with a better end product. Greg Kasabin would say in an interview, "As the person doing the writing, I was very drawn to a particular angle in Greek mythology. What I feel is often lost in the shuffle is that the gods are a big dysfunctional family that we can see ourselves in. I think part of the reason these characters have survived for thousands of years is because they relate so strongly to so many people, and they relate not because they are gods, but because they are human. So we wanted to explore some of that. It felt rich with potential for us, so yeah, we started making it." And of course, the core of the game's appeal is in the interactions of its fast-paced action gameplay, its role-playish narrative paths, and its unexpectedly deep but accessible mechanics. It takes a lot of nuance, a lot of refinement, and a lot of commitment to balance those well, which is also the result of hundreds of hours of development preparation and focus. Greg Kasavin would also go on to say, "We're really drawn to making a game that felt very immediate, that you could pick up and play in short stretches or play as long as you wanted and still have a compelling experience around that." And as we know now, the magic is that Hades effectively delivered that combination in a way that felt so fresh and so perfectly balanced that I honestly could not stop playing. I typically dislike roguelikes because I don't like to lose my progress and redo the same areas over and over. Hades solves this problem by introducing a satisfying sense of progression with an unlockable arsenal of weapons, purchasable keepsake items to benefit an escape attempt, permanent character upgrades, and a story progression with the NPCs you can find in hell. Instead of a classic roguelike where I get to just repeat the game upon death, I developed a strong investment into these ways you could progress, and it gave me reasons to continue trying, tricking the RPG player and me to persevere through my attempts and invest myself into the beautifully curated world and characters. Hades keeps growing beyond a single completion and even beyond 50. The balance and interactions of weapons, powers, and builds were so masterfully done, and the subtlety of choice made me feel a lot more control than I had in previous games in the roguelike genre. Hades was also not easy, but not incredibly difficult, with only some specific fights giving me trouble, and always in a way that felt like I could actually overcome. This low skill floor and high skill ceiling approach defines accessibility in a very satisfying way. Discovering secrets and unlockables became a small obsession and drove me to continue playing into possibly meaningless challenges because I was sure Skelly was probably hiding something else. But the story of the game was an unexpected surprise from many. And while it's true that many roguelike games have phenomenal mechanics and excellent gameplay, none pair that with Hugo Award storytelling that puts Hades into its own category. It's not only the combat and builds that keep you coming back for more, but at some point you begin to play for the story as well, weaving into an expertly crafted blur of awesomeness. Do I keep playing to see what happens to Zagreus next, or do I keep playing to see if I can perfect the spear build? The answer, yes. Because Hades does not only live and die by its combat and mechanics and possesses a story that gets deeper and deeper the further into the game you go, you sort of get lost into the whole thing, spending hours and hours playing where you might only spend 30 minutes playing another roguelike after work each day. It's something you don't expect from a roguelike, or at least you didn't expect it before Hades. Hades has in this way raised the bar for future roguelikes, a genre that has seen few titles since its release. It's almost as if there was no way to top it, so very few have tried. However, we do see more and more games adding roguelike mechanics to them, and this is by and large part of the success of Hades and other popular titles in the genre. So in many ways, Hades has changed the development of many modern games. So that wraps up why Hades is the best game of all time. I hope you guys are enjoying this series and learned something about the development of Hades. We are, of course, expecting new gameplay for Hades 2 at any time. We thought this was going to be shown at the Game Awards. Let me know what you guys think. Have you played Hades? Do you love it as much as we do? Let us know in the comments below.